Have you ever heard of the Vikings? Maybe you have seen them in movies. Maybe you have seen them in TV shows. Big men with long hair and beards, carrying axes, sailing on dragon ships. But who were the Vikings really? Here's something surprising. The Vikings were not a race. They were not one single group of people. Viking was actually a job. When a man from Scandinavia went on a sea voyage to raid or trade, he was called a Viking. Scandinavia is a region in Northern Europe. It includes 3 countries: Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. The people of these 3 countries were called Norsemen or Northmen. They spoke a language called Old Norse. Not all Norsemen were Vikings. Most Norsemen were actually farmers, fishermen, and craftsmen. They lived peaceful lives. They grew crops. They raised animals. They made beautiful jewelry and weapons. But some Norsemen went on adventures. They sailed across dangerous seas. They raided foreign lands. They explored unknown places. These men were the Vikings. The Viking Age began in 793 CE. It ended in 1066 CE. That is about 270 years. In those 270 years, the Vikings changed the world forever. Come from, and why did they raid? To understand the Vikings, we need to understand their homeland. Scandinavia is a beautiful but difficult land. There are tall mountains. There are thick forests. There are long, cold winters. Good farmland is very limited. As the population of Scandinavia grew, there was not enough land for everyone. Younger sons of farmers had a problem. The oldest son inherited the family farm. But what about the younger sons? They had no land. They had no future at home. So they looked to the sea. The sea was everywhere in Scandinavia. Long fingers of water called fjords cut deep into the land. Every village was near water. From childhood, Norsemen learned to sail and fish. The sea was not an obstacle for the Vikings. The sea was a road that led to opportunity, a road that led to adventure, a road that led to wealth. So the young men of Scandinavia built ships. They gathered in groups. They chose a leader, and they sailed away. Some went to trade, some went to settle new lands, and some went to raid. Raiding was fast money. Monasteries in England and France were full of gold and silver. They had no armies to protect them. They were perfect targets. The secret of Viking success was their ships. Viking ships were extraordinary. They were unlike any other ships in the world at that time. The most famous Viking ship was the Longship. The Longship was long and narrow. It was built from overlapping wooden planks. This made it both strong and flexible. It could bend slightly in rough ocean waves without breaking. The Longship was very fast. It could reach speeds of up to 15 kilometers per hour under full sail. For that time, this was incredibly fast. But the most remarkable thing about the Longship was its shallow bottom. Most large ships needed deep water. They could only sail in the open ocean. But the Viking Longship had a flat, shallow bottom. This meant it could sail in very shallow rivers. It could travel far inland into countries. Imagine living in a town far from the sea. You feel completely safe. No ship can reach you. Then suddenly, Viking longships appear on the river, right outside your town. This happened again and again across Europe. Nobody expected it. Nobody was prepared. The longship could also be carried over land. If a river ended, the Vikings simply lifted the ship out of the water. They carried it on their shoulders to the next river. Then they continued. Vikings also used another type of ship called the nar. The nar was wider and deeper than the longship. It was used for long ocean voyages and carrying cargo. The nar carried settlers, animals, and supplies to Iceland and Greenland. Viking ships had no compass. Remember, the compass had not yet reached Europe. So how did Vikings navigate? They used the sun. They used the stars. They watched ocean currents. They watched the behavior of birds and whales. And they used a remarkable tool called a sun compass. A sun compass used the shadow of a wooden stick to determine direction. With these methods, Viking sailors navigated thousands of kilometers of open ocean, reaching places no European had ever been before.
Now let us talk about Viking warriors. A Viking warrior trained from a young age. By the time he was a teenager, he could already fight with a sword and an axe. The most common Viking weapon was the axe. The Viking battle axe was large and heavy. It could cut through shields and armor. A skilled Viking could throw an axe with deadly accuracy. Vikings also used swords. Viking swords were beautifully made. They were double-edged, sharp on both sides. A good sword was extremely valuable. Viking swords were given names. A warrior's sword was like his most prized possession. Vikings also used spears, bows and arrows, and round wooden shields. Viking warriors wore chainmail armor. Chainmail is made of thousands of tiny metal rings linked together. It was very effective against sword cuts, but it was also very expensive. Only wealthy warriors could afford full chainmail. Now, here is something very interesting about Viking warriors. The Vikings believed that how you died was more important than how long you lived. They believed in a place called Valhalla. Valhalla was the hall of the god Odin. It was a paradise for warriors who died bravely in battle. In Valhalla, warriors feasted on delicious food. They drank from golden cups. They fought great battles every day. Their wounds healed every night, and they did it all again the next day, forever and ever. This belief made Viking warriors extremely brave. They were not afraid to die, because death in battle meant Valhalla. Death in battle was the greatest reward. There was a special group of Viking warriors called berserkers. Berserkers were the most feared warriors of all. Before a battle, berserkers worked themselves into a wild, uncontrollable rage. They howled, they bit their shields, they felt no pain, they feared nothing. In this state, they fought like wild animals. Enemies were terrified of berserkers. Even today, we use the word berserk in English. When we say someone went berserk, we mean they lost control completely. This word comes directly from the Viking berserkers. The Vikings believed in many gods, and their gods were fascinating. Unlike the gods of ancient Greece or Rome, Viking gods were not perfect. They made mistakes. They lost battles. They could even die. This made them feel very real and very human.
The most powerful Viking god was Odin. Odin was the king of all gods. He was the god of wisdom, war, and death. Odin had only one eye. He had sacrificed his other eye to gain wisdom. He wanted knowledge so badly that he gave up half his sight. Odin had two ravens named Hugin and Munin. These names mean thought and memory. Every morning, the ravens flew across the entire world. Every evening, they returned and told Odin everything they had seen. Odin knew everything that happened in the world because of his ravens. Wednesday is named after Odin. Woden was another name for Odin. Woden's Day became Wednesday. Then there was Thor. Thor was the god of thunder, lightning, and strength. Thor was huge and powerful. He had a magnificent red beard. He had a magical hammer called Mjolnir. When Thor threw Mjolnir, it created thunder and lightning, and Mjolnir always returned to Thor's hand. Thor was not just a god of war. He was also a protector of ordinary people. Farmers prayed to Thor for good weather and good harvests. Thursday is named after Thor. Thor's Day became Thursday. Then there was Loki. Loki was the trickster god. He was clever, funny, and dangerous. He could change his shape into any person or animal. Loki sometimes helped the gods, but he also caused enormous trouble. He was unpredictable. You never knew which side he was on. The stories of Loki are the most entertaining in all Viking mythology. Today, millions of people know Loki from Marvel movies, but the real Loki from Viking mythology is even more interesting. Most people think of Vikings as raiders and destroyers, but the greatest achievement of Vikings was exploration. The Vikings explored further than any other people of their time. Around 870 CE, Norwegian Vikings discovered Iceland. Iceland is a large island in the North Atlantic Ocean. It was completely empty of people when the Vikings arrived. The Vikings settled Iceland and built a new society there. Iceland is still one of the most unique countries in the world today. The Icelandic language is the closest living language to Old Norse. Icelanders today can still read ancient Viking texts without much difficulty. Then came a remarkable man named Eric the Red. Eric the Red was a Norwegian Viking living in Iceland. He had bright red hair and a fierce temper. He killed a man in a fight and was banished from Iceland for 3 years. So Eric sailed west into the unknown. He discovered a massive island. It was cold and covered in ice and glaciers, but it also had green coastal areas. Eric called this island Greenland. Why name an icy place Greenland? Because Eric wanted settlers to come. He thought a positive name would attract people. It worked. When Eric returned to Iceland and told people about Greenland, many families agreed to sail there. Today, we would call this false advertising, but for Eric the Red, it was brilliant marketing. Now comes the most amazing part of the Viking story. Eric the Red had a son named Leif Erikson. Leif was curious, brave, and adventurous, just like his father. Around the year 1000 CE, Leif Erikson heard stories about land even further west. A Norse trader had accidentally drifted off course and seen a distant coast, but he had not stopped to explore. Leif decided to investigate. He gathered a crew of about 35 men. He sailed west from Greenland into completely unknown waters, and he found it, a new land, with forests full of tall trees, with rivers full of fish, with wild grapes growing on the hillsides. He called this place Vinland. Vin means wine or grapes in Old Norse. Vinland was North America. Leif Erikson and his Vikings stood on the soil of North America around the year 1000 CE. That is approximately 500 years before Christopher Columbus arrived in 1492. For a long time, historians were not sure if this story was true. It seemed like just a legend. But then, in 1960, archaeologists made an incredible discovery. On the northern tip of the island of Newfoundland in Canada, they found actual Viking ruins, real Viking buildings, real Viking tools, real Viking artifacts. The place is called Los Olmedos. Today, it is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The Vikings discovered America. This is now a historical fact. While some Vikings explored west, others went in different directions. In England, Viking raids began in 793 CE with the attack on Lindisfarne Monastery. These raids continued for decades. Then, Vikings began to settle in England. They took over large areas of northern and eastern England. This Viking-controlled area was called the Danelaw. The English king Alfred the Great fought back brilliantly. He is the only English king ever called the Great. Alfred stopped the complete Viking takeover of England, but the Vikings kept the Danelaw. The Vikings left a permanent mark on the English language. Over 1,000 words come from Old Norse. Everyday words like sky, egg, knife, window, husband, and anger are all Viking words. Even the word they comes from Old Norse. In France, a Viking leader named Rollo made a deal with the French king. Rollo received a large area of land in northern France. This land became known as Normandy. The name Normandy means land of the Northmen. The descendants of these Viking settlers became known as Normans. In 1066, the Norman Duke William invaded England. He won the famous Battle of Hastings. He became William the Conqueror, King of England. So English history was dramatically changed by descendants of Vikings. Swedish Vikings went east instead of west. They traveled through what is now Russia and Ukraine. They established trading posts along great rivers. They traded with the Byzantine Empire and the Arab world. They exchanged furs, slaves, and amber for silver and silk. The word Russia may actually come from a Viking word. The name Rus referred to Swedish Vikings who settled in that region. Russia is possibly named after the Vikings.
The Viking Age ended gradually around 1066 CE. Several things caused this. First, Europe got stronger. European kingdoms built better defenses. Stone castles appeared everywhere. Armies became more organized. Raiding became much more difficult and dangerous. Second, Christianity spread to Scandinavia. Viking kings began converting to Christianity. As the new religion spread, the old Viking values slowly changed.
Christianity taught different values from the warrior culture of the Vikings. Third, Scandinavia itself became more stable. Strong kingdoms formed in Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. These kingdoms brought law and order. The wild, raiding lifestyle slowly became unacceptable. The final symbolic end of the Viking Age came in 1066. Two major battles happened that year, both involving descendants or relatives of Vikings, both in England. At the end of these battles, a new era began in England and Europe. The Viking Age was over, but the Viking legacy was just beginning. So, what did the Vikings leave behind? They left their words in the English language: sky, egg, knife, window, Thursday, Friday. Every time you say these words, you are using Viking language. They left their names on the map: Normandy in France, Dublin in Ireland, many cities in England, all founded or named by Vikings. They left their stories, the myths of Odin, Thor, and Loki, still told today, still loved today, still watched in movies and TV shows today. They left their spirit of exploration, the courage to sail into the unknown, the determination to discover what lies beyond the horizon. And they left us one extraordinary fact that most people still do not know. 500 years before Columbus, a Viking named Leif Erikson stood on the shores of North America. He looked at the new land before him and smiled. The Vikings were warriors, yes, but they were also so much more. They were the greatest adventurers the world had ever seen. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you learned many new English words today, and I hope you discovered something surprising about the fascinating world of the Vikings. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to Past in English. Comment below what surprised you most about the Vikings. See you in the next video.